What's up, everybody? Armchair Quarterbacks here for your 2023 Friends League Fantasy Football Season End Review. So let's get right into it here. Let's take a look. We're really going to go over just quickly each team and then just kind of talk about the season overall. So let's start off here with Daniel's team. Overall, taking a look at Daniel's team throughout the season, how did you feel with his team, Shawn?
I thought his team was pretty consistent here. Um, I mean, actually, scratch that. It was up and down. Brock Purdy was probably his most consistent player here. Um, James Cook was decent. Singletary was also decent. I think the biggest misses for him were probably Tony Pollard and Chris Olave. So in that sense, those two were inconsistent. It felt like his team had high points, but his players couldn't do that at the same time. So he obviously had up and down weeks.
Yeah, no, I agree. It definitely felt like, one of his biggest players on the team, Tony Pollard, biggest bust, I think, or if not the biggest, probably, in contention for one of the biggest busts coming out of the draft overall. He did have some players go off for him at certain points of the season. James Cook going off towards the end of the season. Adam Thielen surprisingly going off in the beginning of the season. You mentioned Brock Purdy. He was pretty consistent for most of the part. I think the one other player for me that's going to be interesting going into next year is Cooper Kupp. Just because, the Rams, they have Cooper Kupp. He's a solid player, but then they also have Puka Nacua. And then they also have other players. They have the run game, your Kyren Williams. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Rams do overall and how that's going to affect Cooper Kupp himself. I still think he's a pretty viable player. It's just if he can stay healthy. Really, that's mostly it.
I will say for his team, Daniel looks like he had second lowest points against, so he could have gone lucky here if he had just scored a little bit higher on his points for. It would have probably propelled him close enough to the playoff push. He did have 31 moves during the season, so he was very active. He was probably just as active. Only me and Manny were just as active in terms of how many moves. So he was making, he was at least making pickups, dropping players with injuries, and just being on the watch out. And you could tell that he was keeping up with football news, which is good for anyone else here. You just want to keep up on the news for players.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move over here now to Mike's team. So Mike had some pretty decent players here. I thought, coming out of the draft, he had a pretty decent draft. Again, it's just the same thing. And I think this is the story for every team in the league. It's just you have the big name players that are performing when you need them. And then you also have the big name players that are not performing when you need them. So Mike had Jalen Hurts here. Jalen Hurts was pretty consistent for the most part throughout the entire season. And I think what helped him a lot was that tush push. That tush push got him some touchdowns. That tush push helped him move the offense forward so that way they can be on the field more. And then he also had Christian McCaffrey, who was ridiculous, as again always. Dude's just a beast. I think a lot of games we talked about, he was on the field for like 100% of the snaps, something like that. So it was just like that. But then he also had players like Dalton Schultz kind of letting him down at the tight end position most weeks. And then he also had AJ Dillon. I remember he had drafted, I think he drafted AJ Dillon, dropped him, and then picked him back up again. Yeah. He did. So it's just funny seeing, like AJ Dillon was also another player that should have performed pretty decently, but didn't. What do you think? How are you
The
thinking about Mike's team here?
the encouraging thing, just like I said for last season, is Mikey was up on making moves. As much as he can, pay attention to the news. I mean, things like this Jaden Reed pickup. Um, I didn't know which player to drop to pick up Jaden Reed, and I really didn't want to drop any of my players. And by the time I had figured out, all of a sudden Mike picks up Jaden Reed, and Jaden Reed's been pretty consistent with Christian Watson out. So little things like that, even when Christian Kirk, a big piece for Mike, goes out, Mike's still making these moves here. Something like picking up Antonio Gibson didn't pan out, but the idea is that um, as long as you're active on the waiver wire, that's really good because you're just trying to make the playoffs. And um, you know, the league manager that's active, you have a better chance than someone that's just kind of staying pat with their draft.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. So let's move on here, talking about kind of staying in place a little bit with Michelle's team. And I say that just because the entire season, pretty much, she rode the 10th place spot. I'm very
Mhm.
happy for her that, she was able to get out of that in the playoffs, even though it's the constellation bracket. She's not in last place for the entire season. You know,
Mhm.
overall, she's in was eighth place now. So very glad for her. Talking about some of the players on her team, again, we had some underperformers. Patrick Mahomes being one of the biggest names on her team. He had some really good games, but he also underperformed overall, just in general, when we're looking at what his ADP was, what his value was in the draft.
Yeah, I would say Mahomes was probably one of the biggest disappointments for fantasy football. And you just look at that entire offense. Um, I believe I saw a stat this morning, and it was his average, the average reception for his wide receivers was like 4 yards. So
That's a
it's
lot lower
not
than what it used to be.
it's not Patrick Mahomes' fault. It
Mhm.
looks like Kelsey, call it the Taylor Swift curse, or he's hitting that age, and when is he going to retire? Does he retire? Especially I've heard some people say, like, is he going to retire with his brother
Right,
when Jason Kelsey retires?
right.
Um, but the big thing is they don't have any receivers there, so until they get some sort of help for Patrick Mahomes, they're probably going to try and ride out this defense. But
Well, I mean, for him, speaking of receivers, they had
mhm.
Rasheed Rice come on, get pretty hot towards the end of the season. That's just um, Kansas City didn't really utilize him as they should have until closer towards the
Mhm.
end of the season. So I think if they were able to figure that out earlier, that probably would have helped him. But I think also too, losing Tyreek Hill, that's a big factor. We have to talk about that. Just I
Yep.
think the style that Patrick Mahomes plays with the deep gun, and the style that they play, being a pass heavy offense, you need somebody that's speedy to beat all the defensive backs, and that was Tyreek Hill, and that helped him a lot. And we saw it once Tyreek Hill left. Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, their passing game just kind of died off a lot. So
I will say, let's one last sip that I'll leave off was just make sure that you don't overvalue your players, especially when like when she was in this hole where she was 10th place. There was still time during the middle of the season where you could try and make a spot for playoffs, right? To at least give yourself a chance.
yeah,
I believe it was I offered her some trade offers for either Justin Jefferson or DeAndre Swift. Um, and for Justin Jefferson, she was asking for Stephon Diggs,
yeah.
let's say. And Justin Jefferson, there's all those question marks. So really just evaluate, be willing to give up certain players when you're down in such a deep hole, because you want to make those adjustments. That's part of being a team manager, is knowing um, when you need to shoot for the fences sometimes, and when you need to make those last ditch desperation trades or pickups, anything like that that's going to give you a chance. So
Yeah.
just be cognizant of that.
Yeah, if you're not sure on how to value a player, there's definitely those trade value charts that you can search up online. I think earlier in the season I had talked about that using CBS trade value charts and Fantasy Pros trade value charts.
Yep.
So in the future, moving forward, definitely look at that because I know for sure I made an offer on Jefferson and there was a lot of back and forth where I wasn't willing to give up too much for him. So
Yeah, and if you want, ask other friends, ask other guys in the group.
mhm.
You could ask me, Ryan. Manny's pretty experienced
Yep,
with football, so
yep,
you could ask any of us that are, have watched or played football. Manny played football in high school, so a lot of us have, we've been watching football and around football for a while. So
yep,
even with just fantasy sports.
yep. All right, but congrats, Michelle. You did not get last place overall. You ended up clawing your way back up to eighth. All right, so
Work,
let's
work.
move on here. Next up is my team. So let's take a look here at my team. I will say, since I had to deal with this team, it was very frustrating the entire season dealing with Austin Eckler. It was also very frustrating dealing with Justin Herbert. At some point, it was when he ended up getting the fractured finger. That was one of the things for me that kind of I wasn't 100% sure, how to deal with that.
Hmm.
And being a high value quarterback, I wanted to hold on to him, but it just didn't pan out for him. There was a point. It ended up being when he got injured, and they just said, we're gonna call it a season. We're gonna put him on IR for the whole season. That's when I dropped him. But in retrospect, I probably could have dropped him earlier and picked up and streamed the quarterback position. That probably would have helped me out a little bit better throughout the season. So just things like that. If you guys are listening to this recap here, just things like that, kind of, you have to be willing to make some of those sacrifices. And there was also definitely a couple of players that I could have dropped. I could have held on to Justin Herbert and then still streamed a quarterback here and there. Like you can see here, I'm holding on Jake Browning and Stafford, so 2 players there. What do you think? How did you feel with my team though?
I mean, your team scared me for pretty much the entire season until, you know, we never face off in the playoffs.
Mm,
The AJ Brown trade, again, with this AJ Brown trade, I thought you massively won that trade. I thought that was a big one-sided trade for me because I put so much value on AJ Brown versus Kenneth Walker. But again, this is one of the reasons why we don't veto is because you look at this. If Johnson, Johnson's his own team manager, and he values, say, Kenneth Walker or your Seahawks more for whatever reason, or same thing with if he's a fan of the Rams, and he values a Cooper Cup type or a Puka Nakua type, that's your team. That's yours to manage, and you never know what injuries will play out. You never know what new coordinators show up and what coordinators get fired. There's so many variables here. Um, so just like look at your team with Brees Hall, another trade he made. So many variables. We didn't know that Aaron Rodgers was going to be out for the whole season, you know, or Amon-Ra St. Brown. You thought he was going to be hurt and he's out for 1 game. And then that's like phenomenal for the rest of the season. So I think your team shows just the variability of DFS and football and the nature of football in general. And this is, this is why, just because it looks good on paper, you still have to grind. And as you said, be willing to make that sacrifice to drop someone like a Justin Herbert.
yeah, definitely. Now that I'm like season's done, I can kind of sit back and look at my team. It does look like a DFS lineup. That is true.
I mean, it on paper, this looks like a wild, this is like, I don't know, this is like the Dwight Howard Kobe lineup where it just looks good, but then it doesn't for whatever, for
Just
whatever
something
reason, I
doesn't
guess.
glue together. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look at this. Amon-Ra St. Brown and AJ Brown. It's just, look at when they went off too. So like AJ
Hmm.
Brown cools down like Stephon Diggs towards the end of the season.
Yeah, it's funny too because I traded for AJ Brown right when he cooled off. So
Yeah.
as much as looking at all of the players involved in that trade, as much as a landslide win that was for me, like how most people are thinking, even I agree with that. He just died off. Like he still scored me some decent points, but compared to what he was doing earlier in the season, it's not what I was expecting.
Right. Yeah. So
yeah,
again, just a variance.
Yeah, it's definitely the variance, and that's what happens with football. You have players that get hot and then they just kind of get cold and never get warm again. So,
yep.
All right, so enough about my team. Let's move on here. So, talking about the person that I traded with, let's look at Johnson's team. So Johnson here, he had I made 2 trades with him, that AJ Brown and that Breece Hall trade, and then in those trades included were Justin Fields, Garrett Wilson, and Ken Walker, like we had talked about. You and I had talked about it previously before. If he were trading Ken Walker or trading for Ken Walker, he should have gotten rid of one of Tyler Lockett or JSN, or even both. Just because correlation wise, it's not good to have that many players of the same team on your roster, especially seeing they're at multiple 2 wide receivers and 1 running back. You have a wide receiver go off, your running back's probably not going to see that game. You have your running back go off, wide receiver is probably not going to see a good game. So it's just that correlation there. And some teams, it's possible that both players can see good games.
That's very, very rare, though.
Very rare. And
that was when Patrick Mahomes had Tyreek Hill.
You have to look at the team, who that team is, which is another reason why it's good to at least try and watch some football throughout the season. I will tell you, being a Seattle fan, Seattle's not that team. I don't think they will be as long as Pete Carroll is there.
Pete Carroll's not a Andy Reid air it out type.
Yeah.
So.
But overall, I think Johnson's team ended up being pretty decent. His draft wasn't the strongest, but it also wasn't the worst. But then throughout the trades that he made, though, he had some trades with you, he had some trades with me, and for sure the trades that he had with me ended up being better. Like when I traded Ken Walker to him, Ken Walker started going off a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same with when I traded for Bijan Robinson and that whole saga with Arthur Smith. Look at how Raheem Mostert did for him, and then before Tank Dell got hurt, look how he did for him. And then I even threw in Jackson Smith and Jigba as I would say, before we move on, the one tip that I would give for Johnson, I would definitely say, well, 2, I guess I would say, hey, ask me or Manny if he's going to make that trade with you again, because I would have spotted for sure. I would have spotted at least, you got 3 Seahawks players, man. I just traded you Jackson, JSN.
Well, I had told you too. I did see that when I was in trade talks with him, I was trying to get one of Lockett or JSN. Mostly I wanted JSN. But he wanted to keep him because he said he liked the name.
So I mean that's a big one. Just ask for a second opinion, and then 2, look at the moves here. He only had 4 moves the entire year. So I mean, if you're paying attention a lot more, especially because our waiver wire is free for all, there's several pickups here that he could have easily gotten, and this could have propelled him. Look at how close this group was that made the playoffs.
Yeah.
Even more if he's pushing now for a bye week. Something as simple as a bye week, and that increases your odds even more. So make more waiver wire moves is, just before you go to sleep, check your phone, see if there's anything even.
Yeah, and really quick, just to kind of tag on to that, don't just make waiver wire moves to make waiver wire moves. You got to do some research. You got to look at a team's opponent, who they're going up against and whatnot, and kind of just feel out how certain players have been playing in the past week or so. So
Uh, I would even say like, I mean, if you're really lazy and didn't want to, just pick one podcast. It could be something like Fantasy Footballers, the CBS guys, Fantasy Underdog, whatever it is. Um, I think it's JJ Zacharyson. Um, his podcast is probably the shortest one out of all of them. It's like 20, 30-minute clips, a couple times a week, just enough to get you your, what players are the waiver wire, what players to, aim for, and
yeah,
then you're good.
yeah, I agree. All right, so let's move on here. So Johnson clawed his way out of bottom four, as did Shawn here. Not you, Shawn, but Mike's cousin, Shawn. So he ended up in the 5th spot this season. Taking a look, I'm kind of surprised that he didn't end up in a higher spot just because he had Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson was ridiculous this year. Yes, he had some down games, but the dude was beasting for most of the year. And it was really weird too because the beginning of the season you had a couple players get injured, and I think what was it, J.K. Dobbins injured himself and went out for the rest of the season, I think in week 1. And it felt like the Ravens were trying to find their offensive identity for half the season. But at the same time, Lamar Jackson was just beasting.
I would say, and here's another, looking at the waiver wire again and what you said, Shawn did have 21 moves, so he was looking at that. I think, and I'm pretty sure Shawn watches football too. I think we've talked before on some of our hikes. Yeah, we've gone on the pass. If it was something like I saw you pick up Isaiah Likely, and that was one player I had considered in the playoffs. Could I start, the entire time that we're making all these recaps and we're saying, like for instance, Michelle's team where she was starting 2 tight ends, it's probably the biggest variance, but for whatever reason this season, it worked out, Evan Ingram and Njoku. There's a lot of tight ends that went off. So it's interesting that he didn't pick up Isaiah Likely after Mark Andrews went out. That's just something when you have a key player like that, see if there's a backup for them, So like here, Gus Edwards, perfect. He has Gus Edwards, even if that's negative correlation with your quarterback. Just the fact that he's able to get him. I was kind of bummed I never got him. So be very specific when you guys are looking on the waiver wire in the future, especially if you have players that get hurt or if you see another team's player get hurt, especially if it's your opponent, because that could be a big advantage if you see, say, next week's opponent, their player gets hurt and you pick up their backup.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. Just a overall recap on Shawn's team, I thought he had a pretty strong draft. He stuck it out with Devontae Adams, very scary for some of the year, just because it wasn't 100% sure what his numbers were going to look like, especially once the backup quarterback started coming in.
I was gonna say I had a couple offers that I was gonna place, and I deleted those text messages just because.
I do remember you were talking about trying to trade for Adams. Yes.
I mean, for me, it was by week hell in week 13. So it's like, I think I already had Steph Diggs, Allen. I had like 4 players on bye. And if I had traded for Adams, I think I even faced Shawn in week 13. So it would have been forfeiting that week to him. So I purposely didn't make that trade.
So I mean, it's really weird. It's funny because Shawn had a strong draft, but for half of the season he was on the outside looking in for the playoffs. But then he ended up making it into the playoffs. That's just next year. How can he improve on these on this season and try and get into the top 3 spot? So that's something that he should look at himself and just kind of try to see if he can review some of the moves that he made, the waiver wire pickups, See if there was something that he thought, you know, uh,
Hmm.
would help him, but ended up not helping him. Because throughout the season, this will be available for the league page will be available for a few weeks, and then I think Yahoo takes it off. But I think once Yahoo replaces starts it back up again, I think you do have that history. But either way,
Yep.
you can go through and take a look at all the transactions that you made. So that's not just for Shawn, but for everybody. I advise doing that. It's something I do every once in a while just to kind of, see what moves I made, what helped, what didn't. And that's not necessarily going to be exact for next year too, because every year is different, but it's something you can look at. Let's move on here from Shawn's team over to Ken's team. Ken actually held a pretty strong top 5 spot for most of the season, I think.
It was, yep.
He was
waddle.
Yeah, he was doing pretty well. And it's funny too for me because his team, looking at how he drafted and where his team ended, it wasn't necessarily the strongest team, not all of the players that I would have picked, but it worked out for him. How did you feel with Ken's team here?
I think for me, his team was pretty solid here. The Brian Robinson one, I remember, both of us we were high on Brian Robinson, but you ended up picking Antonio Gibson.
That's
Tua,
a draft pick that I do regret.
Tua was okay. The huge one was Keenan Allen. I mean, pretty much for a good majority of the season, he was pretty healthy for his age. So that was a big deal. James Conner was another great pickup. Where as long as he was healthy, he was getting the usage. Another player that has an injury history like Allen, and yet they still gave him the usage. So as long as he was healthy, so really, really solid team. Even Michael Pittman, I did not see Michael Pittman, especially after losing Anthony Richardson and having Gardner Minshew.
I had a feeling once Anthony Richardson was injured and left for the season, I had a feeling that the Indianapolis Colts were pretty much going to go run heavy, especially I think at that point JT was back. So it was weird seeing that they went all in on Michael Pittman, and I think that was also a factor of Gardner Minshew. He's a veteran; he can throw the ball. He's not afraid to air it out. So it just goes to show, as long as the NFL team in real life has a strong core, they can pretty much move the ball how they want.
Yep.
Yeah, the biggest bummer on Ken's team here, really, Travis Kelce. It has to be said. You mentioned it before. It's you don't know if it's like a Taylor Swift curse or something or what, but there were games where he really performed for you and he was Travis Kelce, but there were also games where he was just a back end tight end and you did not want to play him, but you ended up playing him because it's Travis Kelce.
Taylor Swift curse.
So yeah, it's weird. It's going to be interesting to see what he does next year, if he retires, if he plays again.
Yep.
And also just to see where his health is. If he going to be the tight end that he once was, or are we going to see the tight end this year? I mean, even this year still wasn't horrible. He had 93 receptions for 984 receiving yards. That's legit. That's great. It's just the only thing was he was missing the touchdowns. So it's really weird. It's going to be very interesting to see where he goes moving forward. All right, so we are running out of our Zoom call here. We will take a quick break to restart. We'll catch you guys in a second. so we just finished talking about Ken's team over here. So let's get into our top 3 placement winners. So first up, we'll start here with Mantequilla. That's Shawn's team here. And I will tell you guys, you have no idea how annoying it can get getting a message from Shawn almost every week of the season talking about how fake his team was and and watching his team just be in first the entire season while you're struggling with Justin Herbert and Austin Eckler. I mean, to be fair with you, I will say it was a bummer that Stephon Diggs, he ended up just basically dudding for you for the last, 5 weeks of the season?
Yep.
So that is definitely a big loss. But I'm telling you, man, watching you just score week in, week out, win weeks, and you're telling me you have a fake team is so frustrating to me.
I will concede that your team is a little bit more fake than mine. I will say your team is like a little chihuahua, like the chihuahuas we have here at home. It was all bark no bite, I guess you could say, with your injuries and whatever but I think, especially for the first half, if you looked at my points against, and they evened out towards the end. But towards the beginning of the season, I was getting lucky with some of these wins here. And the teams that really scared me, we went over Waddle. We looked at Shawn's team with Lamar Jackson. You look at Alex's team, really scared me. Even with the negative correlation of having Sam Laporta and Jahmyr Gibbs, there are some really, really solid teams. Look at Manny's team that caught fire towards the last half of the season. I mean, even guys like Rachaad White that we were looking at in the draft.
Yep.
So that's what I say when I say fake team. You want to talk about a team that's either going to score 180 points like I did, or the following week score 80 points. I mean, talk about boom bust. So,
hey man, I'm just going to tell you right now, week 12 up against me, the brothers matchup, you had the biggest blowout of the entire season. 181.66 to 68.78. All right, you won by almost 120 points. It was ridiculous.
Who was it the next week that was pushing for that? Do you remember who it was?
Actually, no, I don't. Let's see.
Yeah, you'd have to look back. Phenomenal. The back-to-back that you would have that, 180s. Especially for half PPR, not full PPR.
Oh yeah, the next week was Alex's team.
Yeah, so
169.
Exactly, and that was the team that I was hoping I wouldn't face in the championship. And so I made, for better or for worse, I made the Zay Flowers move. That was starting to make me nervous. And surprisingly, he plays good the last 2 weeks. It's just I got kicked out of the, I get kicked out of the semifinals, but he did pretty decent. I feel like I might be the only person with Kyren Williams having to be a league winner and saying, yeah, I lost with Kyren Williams. Didn't meet the chip.
I'm sure you're not the only one. I'm sure there's other players out there, but yeah, it's definitely a weird thing. Kyren Williams going off for a majority of the season that he was playing, and he just wasn't on the championship team.
Just really weird. I mean, even look at this, Jerome Ford. I ended up playing, who was it? Roshan Johnson. I took the chance on that against Manny in the semis instead of Jerome Ford.
Yep.
Had I had won that, I probably would have still been nervous to play Jerome Ford. And look, I have him here on the bench. So
hey, you threw out a hypothetical trade to me, and I'm kind of sad that I didn't take it. It was Jerome Ford, and I forget who else. Somebody else for Eckler and another piece. And I feel like
That
Jerome Ford was a lot more consistent compared to Eckler.
consistent with 8 to 10 points.
Hey, that was better than freaking 0 points, man.
I mean, yeah.
Either way, but yeah, it's one of those things where for me, it was funny seeing that, but your team was scoring very well for most of the season. I mean, if I look at your schedule here, the first 6 weeks you won. Your first loss was in week 7 to Ken, and even that was a pretty close matchup. It was less than 2 points, or just over 2 points of a loss. In week 7.
You want to know who I lost? You know who I want to lost? You know who I lost twice to this season? I lost to Michelle's team twice this season.
Did you? No, you won one.
Did I?
5. Yeah, you won week 5, and then you played her again in week 14.
I would have sworn I lost. Okay. But that one might have been a close one. What was the score on the week 5?
Week 5 was a blowout, 115.76 to 74.62.
115.
And then week 14 was closer, 88.92 to 97.34.
All right, that's enough of my team, but we'll just say that my team is proof that even if you're first all season long, that doesn't matter if you don't win the championship. So that doesn't mean anything. All you need to do is a huge tip is don't give up, and as long as you make the playoffs, there's only 2 to 3 weeks there of variance. Anything could happen. So
and another thing, Shawn's talked about it, the amount of moves. The most amount of moves in the league doesn't also necessarily mean you're going to win the league.
Nope.
All right, so let's move on here to Alex's team. And I do have to let you know, since I did see Alex yesterday for breakfast, that he wanted me to tell you, thank you for the tip. You gave him a good person to listen to. And I'm not going to say the full name because that's going to give away a little bit of our secret here. But I can just tell you, Mr. Levi. Mr. Levy. I don't know if you know who I'm talking about, but I'm sure you do. All right, so taking a look here at Alex's team. Again, you had talked about it, that correlation with Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta. That's something that shouldn't have worked, but it did.
I'll give you guys one more hint. Producer Luke, hit that music if you've ever listened to them. I think Manny listens to them for sure.
I'm sure Manny listens to them. I'm sure he knows.
Yeah, for the Q&As, the non-football Q&As, pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But
yeah, this running back tight end from the same team stack should not have worked, but it did. He had Jahmyr Gibbs get hot at the right moment, and Sam Laporta pretty much beasted the entire year. It was a big surprise to everybody because you don't normally see rookie tight ends score consistently for the entire year like this. Usually, at least for the tight end position, it takes them like 3 or 4 years to get comfortable in the league and to actually start producing. So it's very rare to see this. And I think Detroit is going to be one of those offensive teams that's going to be picked apart this offseason, because then they're going to be like, okay, well, do they need a quarterback? Do they need to get away from Jared Goff? Personally, I think yes. You know, but and then the other thing too is, well, they have who is it? Jameson Williams. They need to get him involved more. So that's going to hit my Amon-Ra. But at the same time, it didn't really hit him. You know, he stayed consistent. So let's take a look at here. Who else? How did you feel with Alex's team? I felt pretty concerned anytime I had a matchup against him.
Oh yeah, I thought he was the one to beat. I tried making him a couple trade offers. I forget who it was. I offered him a trade, and then he sent us in the group text like, "Dang, dude, were you trying to take advantage of a newbie or whatever?"
I do remember that text. Yeah,
one of those funny. And it wasn't that bad. I think it was something for Sam Laporta. But the idea was, he does have this kind of negative correlation where these two players on the same team, but he was, he stood firm on Sam Laporta, and um, I remember telling you towards the beginning of the season I wanted to trade for Jameer Gibbs. You know, even if it was a lateral, I think it was Ramondre Stevenson for Jameer Gibbs, and they're both, underperforming. And he stuck it out with Jameer Gibbs, and look what happened with Jameer Gibbs. David Montgomery gets hurt. Jameer Gibbs has a chance to shine, and um, finally gave him the trade with Amari Cooper, and what was that? He breaks the Cleveland Browns record with 260 yards or whatever with Joe Flacco of all players, and look, he has Joe Flacco here. Um, so really, really solid team. This was um, well done to Alex here.
Yeah.
Even the Derrick Henry one, I was questioning, because a lot of analysts were talking about if he's going to fall off the fence or not, if he's going to hit that
The running back cliff, age cliff.
the running back cliff. Look at George Pickens here. A lot of people weren't too high on George Pickens. For me, and Manny's a Steelers fan, but for me, George Pickens I like more than Deontay Johnson. So it's just a matter of time, because George Pickens here is the deep threat. He's the one that's going to be the Odell Beckham, where it might be 2 or 3 catches, but it's almost 100 yards.
No, for sure. I agree. And I mean, for me, there were 2, maybe 3 players that I was eyeing for a trade. I mean, it would have been nice to have Tyreek Hill, but that's a person that you can't trade.
You're not trading that.
The 3 players that I was eyeing: Derrick Henry, and the game that I was eyeing him for, I think it was the Indy game. So either way, I was eyeing Derrick Henry, or it might have been after his bye week, and then also Jameer Gibbs, and possible. I was teasing the thought of Sam Laporta as well. For me, I was willing to risk having that negative correlation, same team, different positions, just because the 3 players for Detroit, Amon-Ra, Jameer Gibbs, Sam Laporta, they were all playing very well. It was one of those things that I was willing to take that risk, but it was hard to find a trade for that. And I don't think I think I kind of offered him some, but it didn't really pan out, which was fine. Looking at the rest of the team, I mean, Alvin Kamara, there was a second where I did consider offering a trade, but again, that's another player that's going to be hard to trade for.
Even before, when, it was because of the suspension, but, if he drafts him, he's kind of waiting. But, look at these targets here, 14 and 14. That's 14 on 33 yards. And then 14 targets, 91 yards.
Yeah. That just shows what he can do, like the wild variance. But 14 for 91, and then he gets a 2-point conversion. Like, dude.
Yeah, and then you throw in like 40 or 50 yards rushing here. That's like, so wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right, so that'll be it for Alex's team. Let's move on over here to our first place winner, Manny's team. Coming up from behind, he was out of the playoff contention for, I believe it was a good majority of the season. And then his team got hot at the right time, riding the backs of Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb for sure. The last half of the season. And then again, just the random players going off for him here and there at the right time.
Yep. I will say, Manny, I was talking to our coworker at work, and just talking about Manny winning, and my coworker goes, "See, remember that one week when you convinced Manny, or you're texting, hey, don't give up, just make the playoffs."
Yeah.
And my coworker was joking around. What if he had said nothing? Just go, nah, go ahead, give up.
What if you just let him give up?
just be a jerk. But Manny's experienced enough with fantasy football, and we've talked about it for the past several years that we've known each other through work before he left the state. But this is a huge lesson to everyone that you're just trying to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
Once you make the playoffs, anything happens. Injuries, weather, anything, variance with football can happen and does happen. So as long as you're grinding, it's 3-4 months of grinding to finally secure that championship.
Yeah, I do remember coming out of the draft. I wasn't 100% scared of Manny's team,
Same.
like
Yeah.
some other managers. But then throughout the season, once I think it was because I don't think anybody drafted Dak Prescott. Let's see. Yeah, Manny added Dak Prescott on October 30th, just before Halloween. And I believe that is when he started getting hot, So it's just, you just make the right move at the right time and you ride that player to the ground. And
I remember
that's what Manny did.
I remember making offers for CeeDee Lamb probably within the first 5 weeks. Just looking at the schedule, thinking for, because I think you said what? I think my first 6 weeks I won or whatever. And, my team, I didn't think my team was good. I thought that was a lot of luck, a lot of just skating by. And
here we go again with the fake team.
Yep, with the fake team. And Manny was even going, nah, I think I'm still gonna ride out CeeDee Lamb. I think hey, you want Calvin Ridley instead. And even Calvin Ridley ends up scoring 22 in garbage time, like the last 5-10 minutes, scores 2 touchdowns against my team in the semifinals. So I mean, talk about variance here.
No, I mean, same thing. I remember there was a point where I hit up Manny for a trade, to see if anything would pan out. One of the players I was eyeing was Joe Mixon. You didn't care for Joe Mixon at the beginning of the season, and I don't think you care for him even now. But I mean, I think at the point when I was eyeing him, he was an up and down player. It was the beginning of the season. And then after his bye week, he just became a pretty consistent player. I think it was right around then is when I started saying, "Hey, Manny, what do you want for Joe Mixon?" He held on to him, didn't make the trade, which was I think the right move for him, because if you look at Mixon's fantasy totals here, I think from week 8 through week 17, there's only 2 weeks in there that he did not score double-digit points. And for me, that's what my team was lacking, that consistency. So that was something for me that I wanted to get, but I couldn't. There was nothing that would have panned out. I don't remember what some of the other players that we had involved in our talks, but it was just interesting that, he was open to it, but whatever players I was offering didn't work out for him. And it makes sense because, sometimes you don't want to offer up the big name players for somebody that, like Joe Mixon is an aging player. Very interesting.
I will say, you bring up Alex. I guess you said, I don't remember telling Alex about that podcaster that we're talking about. But he was pretty high. Him and his partner in crime were pretty high on CeeDee Lamb. To the point where I was super high on Josh Allen. He's my boy. But I actually thought about going Stephon Diggs, CeeDee Lamb. I believe I had the 9-11 spot. So that was really interesting. That even I was pretty high on CeeDee Lamb at the draft. I don't know if I would have traded him. I might have not had as much patience. Manny had a lot of patience with CeeDee Lamb, which was really good. And then one last thing. I thought this was pretty funny that he just added Tom Brady.
That was that I was gonna mention that too. That's that. What was it? The CBS guys, the luck player ad.
I don't. As soon as I lost this, I was kind of done. I haven't listened to podcasts, for the past
Also,
week,
I don't
but
think you told him directly.
pretty-
I don't think you told Alex directly about that podcaster. I think it was just like a mention in passing.
okay.
Yeah.
That's he's a shark. That person that Alex looked up, that guy will play probably 5 to 10 grand every week on DFS. So
Yep.
that's a really smart. And
Well-
his partner, Millie Maker.
So just a quick recap of the season overall. Again, Michelle held down the 10th spot the entire season. And even though she didn't make the playoffs, the playoffs itself, she was able to still crawl out of the 10th spot up to 8th. And Manny also, we were talking about him just now. He was out of playoff contention, crawled his way out of being eliminated to, I think it was like 5th or 6th going into the playoffs. And then look at Manny now, he's league winner. So this year was definitely a weird year overall for, I think, all teams. All teams had to deal with some kind of injury, some kind of inconsistent scores, but that happens. That's just winning the league championship is really more so a matter of how you deal with it. And Manny having the patience and also having the luck as well definitely helped him out. Any final thoughts for you, Shawn?
I think that's pretty much it. Get prepared. I would say, like fantasy footballers is year round, as they say. They'll do 1 or 2 podcasts. Before we know it, we start in September. But I mean, realistically, we're already mock drafting in August, maybe even July.
Shoot, me and Shawn started mock drafting in May.
Yeah, I think the first time before Manny even joined our league, when he was still working with me at the state, we would just be mock drafting because we were so bored at our cubicles. So I mean,
yeah.
You guys don't have to go as hardcore as us, but just tune into a podcast, pick 1 or 2, really easy. Just keep up, maybe listen to once football news starts picking up again, training camps, just kind of see who got hurt, who's healthy.
Yeah, and I feel one of the biggest tips that I can give, if you're not comfortable with drafting, do practice mocks. Me and Shawn sent out several messages. Hey, we're gonna practice some mock drafts here and there. If you can jump in with us and get some practice mocks in, that's going to be beneficial for you, because then you're going to know, okay, this player is going around this round, so it's going to be beneficial, because when me and Shawn mock, a lot of the times we're mocking at random positions. We don't mock from, hey, we're going to get the 3rd spot, so I'm going to always mock from that position. If you look at the way me and Shawn do it, oh man, Shawn's even worse than me. He will do like 10 mocks in a row from first position, then 10 from the 2nd position, and he grades each of his drafts. So it's one of those things where if you can get on, you can get some practice mocks, do it with us. Because we do sleeper mock drafts because they're a lot quicker. Especially because when nobody's there, it's just computerized, so it's auto pick. So
yeah, especially if you're just watching TV, you just throw that sucker on, or if you're bored, you
don't have to 100% pay attention to it. You can look at it after the fact.
You don't even need to do the whole thing. Just do like the top 5 first 5 rounds. So before we know it, it's gonna be here.
Yep, that's it. All right, so before we get out of here, I've got this all set up right here. I don't know if you guys can see that here. This is, Shawn, you can't see it. Oh my goodness. This is, well, it's too bright. But Manny, this is your payout Zelle payment here. I am hitting review and send right now. It is 10:37 p.m. on January 2nd. Sending now. You should receive the notification, and you'll probably get the money in your bank account tomorrow.
Let's go.
Again, congrats to third place Shawn, second place Alex, and our first place winner, crawling from the bottom of the heap, Manny.
Wingo.
All right. Hopefully, we'll catch everybody next year for the 2024 season. But that's it for now. We'll catch you guys again later. Peace out, guys.